Captain Tavan's distraction could not last forever, and they all knew it. Yuna and Churi made their way through the station while avoiding patrols and staying in the shadows. They reached the Star Weaver's docking bay just as Tavan was finishing. His lengthy complaints about trade regulations. "Ah, there you are," the old captain said smoothly when he saw them. "My associates have arrived, and I believe we can conclude our discussion." Administrator, Voss stared at Yuna with barely contained fury. "That woman is a criminal," he snarled. "She's wanted for breaking and entering and theft of private property." "Really?" Tavan said with exaggerated surprise. "Because I have just received some very interesting data from my young colleague here, and it suggests that you are the one who should be worried about criminal charges." He held up a transmission device. "I have taken the liberty of sending this evidence to several parties, including the Galactic Trade Authority and the news networks of 3 major species and the human embassy on Station Covenant." Voss went pale. "You cannot do that," he stammered. "The evidence was obtained illegally, and no court will accept it." "Perhaps," Tavan agreed, "but I suspect the families of the 200 people you sold into slavery will not care much about legal technicalities, and neither will the journalists, who are about to make you the most hated being in 3 sectors." The news spread faster than anyone expected within hours. The story was everywhere, and investigators from multiple species were demanding access to Nexus Point. Kravix and Thorn tried to flee on their private ship, but found the docking clamps mysteriously locked. "Human security codes," Yuna explained. When Churi asked, "I may have had some friends in the dock authority who owed me favors." The arrests happened the next day. Kravix and Thorn, an administrator, Voss and a dozen of their associates were taken into custody by a joint task force that did not answer to anyone on Nexus Point. The evidence was overwhelming, and the testimony of freed trafficking victims sealed their fate. Yuna stood in the station's main plaza and watched the criminals being led away in restraints. Her injuries still ached, but she felt lighter than she had in years. "You did this," Churi said softly beside her. "We did this," Yuna corrected. "I could never have gathered that evidence without you, and I would be halfway to a mining colony by now if you had not come back for me." She looked at her friend with genuine curiosity. "Why did you come back and you could have just taken the evidence and run?" Churi was quiet for a moment. "When you stood up for me in that marketplace, you did not know anything about me," she said. "You did not know I could help you, and you did not know I had special abilities, and you defended me simply because it was right." Her wings caught the light and shimmered with deep purple and blue. "That is what Kinveth means, Yuna, and it is not a debt that can be repaid with a single act." She turned to face Yuna directly. "You changed something in me when you proved that strangers can be worth protecting, and I want to find more people like you, and I want to be more like you." Captain Tavan approached them with a smile on his weathered face. "The Veleth Council has asked me to thank you, Sergeant Park," he said. "What you did for Churi and what you exposed here will change how people see our species." He bowed his head slightly. "We have spent generations being called scavengers and thieves, and you showed the galaxy that a Veleth was worth defending. Any decent person would have done the same." Yuna said, "No." Tavan replied gently, "They would not, and that is precisely why your actions matter." A representative from the human embassy found Yuna later that day and offered her a position with an organization that investigated abuses against minor species. "We need people like you," the representative said, "people who see injustice and cannot walk away." Yuna accepted without hesitation, but she had one condition. "I want Churi as my partner," she said. "Her abilities and her perspective are invaluable, and I trust her completely." The representative agreed, and just like that, their future was decided. On the day they left Nexus Point, Yuna and Churi stood together at the viewport of their transport ship and watched the station shrink behind them. "Are you nervous?" Yuna asked. "About what comes next?" A little, Churi admitted, but I'm also excited because we are going to help people. Yuna and we are going to find others who have been forgotten or ignored. She turned to look at her friend. Do you remember when you asked me why I keep following you? You said something about Kinveth. Yuna recalled. That was true, Churi said, but it is not the whole truth. Her compound eyes seemed to glow with warmth. The whole truth is that you are my friend, and I do not want to be anywhere else. Yuna felt tears prick at her eyes, and she blinked them away. You know, she said, humans have a saying that friends are the family we choose. I like that, Churi said. Is that what we are then, and are we family? Yuna smiled and reached out to touch Churi's delicate hand. I think we are, she said. And I think we have been since that first day in the marketplace, when you looked at me like I was insane for helping you. You were insane, Churi pointed out. Those Gorvath could have killed you, but they did not, Yuna said. And look what we accomplished together. The stars stretched out before them and promised adventure and purpose and the chance to make a difference. So where do we go first, partner? Yuna asked Churi's. Wings lifted with excitement. Wherever we are needed, she said, and wherever there are people who have lost hope. She settled into the co-pilot's seat beside Yuna as if she had always belonged there. Besides, she added, someone has to keep you out of trouble, and I have decided that someone is going to be me. Yuna laughed and began the launch sequence. I would not have it any other way. Churi and I would not have it any other way. The ship lifted away from the docking bay and accelerated toward the stars. Inside, two unlikely friends sat side by side and ready to face whatever challenges awaited them. A human who could not walk away from injustice, and a Velith who had learned that kindness still existed in the galaxy. Together they would remind the universe that the forgotten were worth remembering, and that the powerless deserved protection, and neither of them would ever have to face the darkness alone again. Churi flew through the station corridors faster than she had ever moved in her life. Her wings burned with exhaustion, and her heart pounded against her chest, but she could not stop. She kept seeing Yuna's face in that terrible moment when the guards burst through the door and kept hearing her voice screaming for Churi to run. The data chip was clutched tight in her hand, and she knew it contained everything they needed to destroy the trafficking ring. But what good was evidence if Yuna died for it? She found a hiding spot in a ventilation shaft and pressed herself into the darkness. Her compound eyes saw the heat signatures of Gorvath guards searching the corridors below, and she held perfectly still until they passed. Think, she whispered to herself. Yuna would think, and she would find a way. The problem was impossible. Churi was alone on a station where her species was despised and the authorities were corrupt. She had no allies and no resources and no one who would listen to a Velith with a wild story about trafficking unless she could find someone who did not belong to this station. A memory surfaced from deep in her past when she was young, and her grandmother told stories of how the Velith used to communicate. We had a network once, her grandmother said. A frequency that connected all our ships across the stars, so no Velith was ever truly alone. The frequency had fallen into disuse when the Velith scattered and lost their unity, but Churi still remembered. She had learned it as a child the way human children learn nursery rhymes, and she had never forgotten. It was a desperate hope. There might not be any Velith ships within range, and even if there were, they might not answer. But Yuna had taken a desperate chance for a stranger, and Churi would do no less. She pulled out her communication device and modified the settings until it could broadcast on the ancient frequency. This is Churi of the Wandering Velith, she transmitted. I call upon any of my people who can hear me, and I beg for aid. She described Yuna and what she had done and what had happened in the warehouse. A human defended me when no one else would, she said. She stands against slavers, and now she has been captured because she chose to help someone she did not know. Her voice cracked with emotion. I cannot save her alone, and I'm asking my people to remember what we once were, and I am asking you to help me help her." She ended the transmission and waited. In the darkness, minutes passed and felt like hours. Churi began to accept that no one would answer and that she would have to find another way. Then her device crackled to life. "This is Captain Tavan of the trading vessel Starweaver," a deep voice said. "I heard your transmission, young one, and I confess I never expected to hear the old frequency again." "Captain," Churi gasped, "you received my message." "Every word," Tavan replied, "and I find myself moved by what you describe because it has been a long time since anyone showed kindness to our people." There was a pause. "My ship is 4 hours from Nexus Point and we carry cargo that gives us legitimate reason to dock, but I need to understand the situation better," Churi explained. Everything in rapid bursts. The false accusation and Yuna's intervention and the evidence they gathered and the trafficking ring that had operated for years. "Administrator Voss is part of it," she said. "The station authorities cannot be trusted." "Then we will not rely on them," Tavan said. "I'm transmitting our approach vector now, and when we arrive, we will demand to speak with station management about trade negotiations." His voice hardened, "And while they are distracted by an unexpected diplomatic situation, you and I will find your human friend." "Thank you," Churi whispered. "Thank you, Captain." "Do not thank me yet," Tavan replied. "We have much work to do, and 4 hours is a long time when someone's life hangs in the balance." Churi spent those hours watching and waiting and gathering information. She used her abilities to monitor security communications and track the movements of Kravex's guards. She learned that Yuna was being held in a private detention cell in Section 12, and that a transport ship was scheduled to arrive the next morning to take her away. The Starweaver docked exactly on schedule, and Captain Tavan emerged to demand a meeting with station management. He was an older Velith with wings that had faded to silver and eyes that carried the weight of many years, but he moved with authority that Churi had never seen from one of her kind. "I represent Velith trading interests," he announced to the startled dock officials, "and I have concerns about the treatment of my people on this station that must be addressed immediately." The officials scrambled to respond, and Administrator Voss was summoned from whatever dark corner he had been hiding in while everyone focused on the unexpected diplomatic incident. Churi slipped through the station towards Section 12. She found the detention area guarded by a single Gorvath who looked bored and underpaid. "Excuse me," she said sweetly. "I am looking for the cargo processing center." The guard barely glanced at her. "Wrong section, bug, and get lost before I." He never finished the sentence. Churi moved faster than any being that size expected, and her delicate limbs struck precise points on his neck that her grandmother had taught her long ago. "We were scientists," she whispered as the guard crumpled, "but we also knew how to defend ourselves." She found Yuna in a small cell, with her hands still bound and bruises darkening her face. "Churi," Yuna breathed with disbelief. "You came back, and why would you come back?" "Because you showed me what courage looks like," Churi said as she worked on the restraints. "Because leaving you behind would make everything you did meaningless." The restraints fell away and Yuna rubbed her wrists. "I thought I was going to die in a mining pit somewhere," she admitted. "I thought I would never see Earth again." "Not today," Churi said firmly. "But we are not finished yet, because the evidence needs to reach people who can act on it." Yuna smiled despite her injuries. "You have a plan." "Captain Tavan has a plan," Churi corrected. "I just have stubbornness and a debt to repay." "I told you that you do not owe me anything," Yuna said, "and I told you that is exactly why the debt is real," Churi replied. She helped Yuna to her feet. "Now come with me, because we have a trafficking ring to destroy, and I'm not leaving your side until it is done." Yuna laughed weakly. "You know something, Churi?" "What?" "I am really glad I stopped to help you in that marketplace." Chari's wings lifted in what Yuna was learning to recognize as a Koe in that marketplace. Chari's wings lifted in what Yuna was learning to recognize as a Velith smile. So am I, Yuna, human, and so am I. They waited until the station's artificial night cycle when the corridors grew dim, and most of the merchants closed their stalls. Yuna had spent the afternoon studying security, schedules, and access codes while Chari explained more about her people and their abilities. The Velith were scientists once, Chari told her as they prepared to move. Before our world died, we studied the universe and built great observatories to watch the stars. Her wings drooped with sadness. Now we are beggars and scavengers, and everyone has forgotten what we used to be. Not everyone, Yuna said. I will remember, and when this is over, I will make sure others remember too. Chari's compound eyes reflected something that might have been gratitude. They made their way through the service corridors that ran behind the main market district. Yuna had learned these passages during her security work, and she knew which routes had cameras and which were blind spots. The Gorvath keep their private warehouse. In Section 7, she whispered, that is where they process the contracts and arrange transport for their victims. How do you know this? Churi asked. I bribed a dock worker with a bottle of Terran whiskey. Yuna admitted, humans have learned that sometimes the best intelligence comes from people everyone else ignores. They reached an access hatch that led to the warehouse section, and Yuna paused to check her scanner. 2 guards inside, she said. Both Gorvath and both armed. Churi's antennae twitched and she tilted her head in concentration. There is a security field as well, and I can see the frequency pattern. She studied the invisible barrier with her compound eyes. It cycles every 30 seconds, and there is a gap of 4 seconds between cycles when the field drops. Can you time it exactly? Yuna asked. I can count the electromagnetic pulses, Churi confirmed. Tell me when, and I will get us through. They waited in tense silence until Churi suddenly grabbed Yuna's arm. Now, she hissed. They slipped through the hatch and into a narrow corridor lined with storage containers. Yuna pressed herself against the wall and listened for movement. The warehouse stretched out before them, filled with crates and shipping containers stacked 3 high. At the far end, she could see a lit office area where shadows moved behind frosted glass. That is where they keep the records, she whispered. We need to get to that terminal. They moved through the maze of containers like ghosts, and Chari's natural grace made her almost invisible in the dim light. Her wings were folded tight and her compound eyes swept constantly for threats. They were halfway across when Churi suddenly froze. Guards, she breathed. Coming this way. Yuna pulled her behind a large crate, and they pressed themselves into the shadows. 2 Gorvath guards walked past, speaking in low, rumbling voices. The human is still asking questions, one of them said. Kravix wants her dealt with before she causes real trouble. She is just one human, the other replied with contempt. What can she do against us? Kravix does not take chances, and you know what happened to the last person who threatened our operation. Their voices faded as they continued their patrol, and Yuna felt her heart pounding. They are already planning to move against me, she whispered. We need that evidence tonight. They crept forward until they reached the office door. Yuna produced a small device from her pocket and held it against the lock. Override tool, she explained quietly. Standard security equipment, and I may have forgotten to return it when I left my last assignment. The lock clicked open and they slipped inside. The office was cluttered with datapads and shipping manifests, and a large terminal sat on a desk covered with documents. Yuna moved to the terminal while Churi stood watch at the door. I need you to find the frequency you recorded, Yuna said. If we can match it to their communication logs, then we will have proof of conspiracy. Churi joined her at the terminal, and her antennae extended toward the screen. There, she said, pointing to a string of numbers. That is the frequency I saw, and it corresponds to a transmission. Sent 3 hours before my arrest. Yuna pulled up the associated files, and what she found exceeded her worst expectations. This is everything, she breathed. Names and dates and transport schedules and payment records. She scrolled through pages of data. They've moved over 200 people through this operation and sold them to mining companies and factory ships across 3 sectors. Can we copy it all? Churi asked. Already doing it, Yuna said as she inserted a data chip. This will take about 5 minutes. They did not have 5 minutes. The door burst open, and the 2 Gorvath guards filled the entrance with weapons drawn. Well, one of them said with a cruel smile. Kravix was right about you, human, and now you have made our job much easier. Yuna moved fast. She grabbed a heavy data pad from the desk and threw it at the first guard's face while diving sideways. The guard roared in pain as the pad connected with his eye, and Yuna used a moment of confusion to tackle the second guard at the knees. Churi, run, she shouted. Take the data and get out of here. Churi hesitated for one terrible second, and her compound eyes wide with fear. Go! Yuna screamed as she struggled with the Gorvath, who was already recovering. Find someone who can help and do not let them bury this. Churi grabbed the data chip and fled through the door. Yuna heard her wings buzzing as she took flight and disappeared into the warehouse. Then a massive fist connected with her head, and the world went dark. When she woke up, her hands were bound, and her head throbbed with pain. She was sitting in a chair in a different room, and Kravix stood before her with Administrator Voss at his side. You have caused me a great deal of trouble, human, Kravix said. I was willing to let you walk away after your little display in the market, but you just had to keep digging. Yuna spat blood on the floor. Your operation is finished, she said. The evidence is out there, and you cannot stop it now. You mean the Velith? Voss laughed. She is alone and friendless on a station where everyone hates her kind. And who do you think anyone will believe? He leaned close enough that Yuna could smell his rancid breath. A respected administrator or a scavenger with stolen data. Besides, Kravix added, she will not get far, and my people are already hunting her. He gripped Yuna's chin with one clawed hand. You will join our next shipment, human, and I know some mining operators who pay extra for your species. He released her roughly. Enjoy your last few hours of freedom, because where you are going, there is no rescue, and there is no hope. Yuna watched them leave and tried to ignore the despair creeping into her heart. She had gambled everything on doing the right thing, and now it seemed she would pay the ultimate price. But somewhere out there, Churi was running with evidence that could expose everything. Yuna had to believe that her sacrifice meant something. She had to believe that Churi would find a way. Yuna brought Churi to her small quarters in the residential section of Nexus, point where workers like her lived in compact rooms barely big enough for a bed and a desk. It was not much, but it was private, and more importantly, it was safe. Churi perched on the edge of a chair with her wings folded tight against her back and her compound eyes tracking every movement Yuna made. You can relax, Yuna said as she pulled up her computer terminal. No one is going to hurt you here. I am not certain I know how to relax anymore, Churi replied. My people have learned that safety is always an illusion, especially when dealing with other species. Yuna paused and looked at her guest with new understanding. The Velith have not had an easy time in the galaxy, have they? Churi made a soft clicking sound that might have been a bitter laugh. Our homeworld was destroyed by ecological collapse 3 generations ago, and since then we have wandered from place to place, taking whatever work we could find and surviving however we could. Her antennae drooped with what looked like shame. Other species call us scavengers and thieves because we take what others throw away, and because we have no home to return to. That does not make you thieves, Yuna said firmly. That makes you survivors. Churi's wings rustled with surprise. You are the first outsider who has ever said such a thing to me. Yuna turned back to her terminal and began pulling up records. Tell me exactly what happened at that stall and do not leave anything out." Chari recounted her morning in careful detail. She had been walking through the market, looking for discarded food or broken items she could repair and sell. She passed the Gorvath stall without stopping and did not even glance at their merchandise. A few minutes later, the merchants grabbed her and started shouting about theft. "I never touched anything," Chari insisted. "I know better than to go near Gorvath, and everyone knows. They hate my kind." "That is what I thought," Una muttered as her fingers flew across the terminal. "This does not add up at all." She pulled up the public records for the two Gorvath merchants whose names were Kravix and Thorn. What she found made her stomach turn cold. "Churi," she said slowly, "this is not the first time those two have accused someone of theft, and every single time the accused has been from a minor species with no political power or allies." She turned the screen so Churi could see. "Look at this pattern and tell me what you notice." Chari leaned forward, and her compound eyes processed the information with remarkable speed. 12 accusations over the past 2 years, she said, all against species like mine and all resulting in indentured servitude. Her voice dropped to a whisper, but the stolen items were always conveniently recovered after the sentencing. "Exactly," Una said grimly. "They are not merchants who happen to catch thieves, and they are targeting vulnerable people on purpose." She dug deeper into the records and found shipping manifests and labor contracts and transfer orders that painted an ugly picture. "These indentured servants are being sold," she said. "Kravix and Thorn use false accusations to get legal control over their victims, and then they sell those contracts to mining operations in the outer territories." Churi went very still. "They are slavers," she said, and there was no question in her voice. "They are slavers who use the law as their weapon." Una nodded and felt anger burning in her chest. "And they have connections to make it work, because look at this." She pulled up another file. Every case was processed by the same station administrator, and every case was rushed through without proper investigation. "Administrator Voss." Chari read the name. "He's Gorvath as well." "Of course he is," Una said. "This is a trafficking ring operating right under everyone's noses, and they use legal cover to make it all look legitimate." She stood up and paced the small room. "We need evidence that will hold up, and we need to get it without tipping them off." "They will be watching you now," Churi said. "You challenged them publicly, and Gorvath do not forgive such insults." "I know," Una admitted, "but I'm not going to let them get away with this, and I'm definitely not going to let them take you." Churi was quiet for a long moment. "Why do you care so much?" she asked finally. "You have known me for less than a day, and my freedom means nothing to your career or your species, and yet you act as if my fate matters to you personally." Una stopped pacing and considered the question seriously. "Because it does matter," she said. "Where I come from, we believe that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, and if I walk away from this, then I am part of the problem." She sat down across from Churi. "Humans are not always good, and we have made terrible mistakes throughout our history, but one thing we try to remember is that the powerful do not get to crush the powerless just because they can." Churi's wings lifted slightly and caught the light in a shimmer of purple and blue. "My people have a concept called kinveth, which does not translate well into common," she said. "It means something like a debt that is also a gift, and it is created when someone does something noble for another without expecting reward." She tilted her head. "You have created kinveth today, Una, and among my people. That is a sacred thing. I do not need you to owe me anything." Una said quickly, "That is not why I helped you." "I know," Churi replied. "That is exactly why the kinveth is real." She rose from her chair and moved closer. "I want to help you expose these slavers, not because I owe you, but because you showed me that good people still exist in this galaxy." Her compound eyes seemed to glow with determination. "There is something I did not tell you about what happened in the marketplace, because I've learned never to reveal our abilities to outsiders. Yuna leaned forward with interest. What kind of abilities? Velith eyes are not like the eyes of other species, Cherry explained. We see beyond the visible spectrum, and we can perceive electromagnetic frequencies that most beings cannot detect, and our memory of what we see is perfect. She gestured toward the terminal. When I passed that stall, I saw Kravix exchange a data chip with someone in the crowd, and I recorded the frequency of that transmission without even trying to. Yuna felt hope surge through her. You saw evidence of their operation. I believe so, Cherry said. And if we can access the right systems, then I can recreate what I witnessed. Yuna stood up, and her mind was already racing through possibilities. Then we have a chance, she said. We actually have a chance to bring these monsters down. She looked at Cherry with new respect. Partners, she asked, and extended her hand in the human gesture of agreement. Cherry studied the hand for a moment, and then carefully placed her delicate limb against Yuna's palm. Partners, she agreed. Now let us plan how to destroy a trafficking ring. The trading station called Nexus Point never slept and never stayed quiet for long. Sergeant Yuna Park walked through the crowded market district with her hands loose at her sides and her eyes scanning every shadow and corner out of habit. She had worked security for 3 years now, and the chaos of 1,000 different species buying and selling and arguing had become background noise to her. The air smelled like copper and spice and something sweet she could never identify no matter how many times she passed through. Yuna liked this place despite its dangers because it reminded her that humanity was just one small piece of a much larger universe. A scream cut through the noise and made her stop. It was not a human scream, but something higher and more desperate, like breaking glass mixed with a bird call. Yuna pushed through the crowd toward the sound and found a scene that made her jaw tighten with anger. 2 massive Gorvath merchants had cornered a small alien against a wall. The Gorvath were reptilian creatures with 4 arms each and scales the color of dried blood. They towered over their victim by at least 2 feet and used their bulk to block any escape. The small alien was a Velith, and Yuna had only seen a few of them during her time on the station. They looked like praying mantises with delicate limbs and wings that shimmered with colors that shifted when they moved. This one had wings of deep purple and blue, and her large compound eyes were wide with terror. Thief, one of the Gorvath, bellowed loud enough for the whole market to hear. This filthy scavenger stole from our stall, and we demand justice. The Velith made that broken glass sound again and tried to speak, but her voice came out as barely a whisper. I took nothing, she managed to say in heavily accented common. I was only walking past, and I touched nothing. The second Gorvath grabbed one of her thin arms, and she cried out in pain. Lies, he snarled, and his forked tongue flickered with contempt. Everyone knows your kind cannot resist stealing, and we are missing 3 crystalline processors worth more than your worthless life. A crowd had gathered, but no one stepped forward to help. Yuna saw species of all kinds, watching with expressions ranging from disgust to indifference. The Velith had no friends in this galaxy, and everyone knew it. Station security arrived in the form of 2 officers who looked bored before they even assessed the situation. What seems to be the problem here? The larger officer asked, though his tone suggested he had already decided. This Velith stole from us, the first Gorvath said, and his voice dripped with false calm. We demand she be held for proper punishment under station law. The security officer nodded without even looking at the Velith. Theft from licensed merchants carries a penalty of 5 years indentured servitude, he recited. We will process her immediately. Wait, the Velith cried, and her wings fluttered. In panic, I did not steal anything, and you cannot prove that I did. Your kind does not need proof, the officer replied with a cruel smile. Everyone knows what Velith are. Yuna had seen enough. She stepped forward and planted herself between the Gorvath merchants and their victim. Actually, she said in a voice that carried across the watching crowd. Station Protocol 7-3 requires physical evidence or verified witness testimony before any accusation can proceed to sentencing. The security officer blinked at her with surprise, but quickly turned to irritation. And who were you to quote protocol at me, human? Sergeant Una Park, she replied, and kept her voice steady. Security consultant for the Meridian Trading Company. And someone who actually read the station bylaws before taking a job here. She turned to the Gorvath merchants who were staring at her with undisguised hatred. Did anyone actually see this? Velith, take your merchandise, she asked. We know she did, the first merchant growled. She was near our stall, and then our items were missing. And what more proof do you need? I need actual proof, Una said. Being near a stall is not a crime, and if it were then half this market would be guilty, right? Now, the crowd murmured, and she saw a few heads nodding. The security officer shifted his weight and looked uncomfortable. This is not your concern, human, he said. The Gorvath are respected merchants withstanding on this station, and this Velith is nobody. She is somebody to me, Una said, and she surprised herself with how much she meant it. And unless you want me to file a formal complaint about protocol violations with the station administrator, then I suggest you conduct a proper investigation before condemning anyone. The larger Gorvath stepped toward her, and his forearms flexed with barely contained violence. You would make enemies of us for this worthless creature, he demanded. You would risk your position and your safety for a species that everyone despises. Una met his eyes without flinching. I would risk a lot more than that to stop an innocent person from being enslaved, she said. That is what humans do. The standoff stretched for a long moment. The crowd had grown larger, and Una knew that the merchants could not simply attack her with so many witnesses. Their operation depended on the appearance of legitimacy. Finally, the first Gorvath made a sound like grinding rocks that might have been a laugh. Very well, human, he said. We will conduct your proper investigation, and when we prove this thief guilty, then you will share her fate for interfering. He pointed one clawed finger at Una. You have made a powerful enemy today, and you will regret this kindness before the end. The security officers backed away, looking relieved to escape the situation. The crowd began to disperse, though many cast curious glances at Una as they left. When the Gorvath finally retreated to their stall, Una turned to find the Velith staring at her with those huge compound eyes. Up close, she could see that the alien was trembling, and her iridescent wings hung low against her back. Why? The Velith asked, in a voice like wind chimes. Why would you do that for me? Because it was the right thing to do. Una said simply, I am Una, and what is your name? I am called Churi, the Velith replied, and I do not understand you at all, Una human. That is okay, Una said with a small smile. Most people do not understand humans, and we have learned to live with that. She looked toward the Gorvath stall, where the two merchants were watching them with cold reptilian eyes. But right now, we need to get you somewhere safe, because I do not think those two are going to play fair with their investigation. Churi tilted her head in a gesture. Una could not read. You will help me more, she asked with obvious confusion. You have already risked much, and you owe me nothing. I started this, Una said, and I intend to finish it. She gestured for Churi to follow her. Come on and let us find out what those Gorvath are really hiding, because I have a feeling this is about more than a few missing processors. Churi hesitated for only a moment before her wings lifted slightly, and she fell into step beside Una. You are very strange, she said quietly. Thank you. Una replied, I get that a lot.